welcome. So welcome everyone. This is a webinar. I think this is number 8
Yes.
in our series on organic agility. And the first one was named Why Your Company Will Fail in 2020. I hope not many of you did that. And I hope that that's why you are now around in 2021 and becoming a resilient organization and so on. So we are up at principle number 4, which is about validating changes in small increments. We'll talk a little bit about the general organic agility concept or framework. And we'll specifically talk about principle number 4, which is well, if I was to summarize it in a nutshell, it's about, you know, how you are applying agile principles to your own products. Well, imagine that your product is your organization actually, and then you are applying agile principles to that, to developing it and bringing it forward, making it more flexible, more resilient, more agile generally. Makes a lot of sense, I hope. And then we have a part 9 coming up. The date has not been set yet.
Exactly, but it's going to happen.
It's about optimizing the value flow.
Yeah, and that's going to happen still in spring. So stay tuned for that.
Set my cell phone on mute, always helps.
Good.
A couple of things about the tools we are using, primarily Zoom. So feel free to use the chat, obviously. And you can reach everyone. I'm not actually going to read the chat much while I'm talking. Fia will, I hope, be able to pick up questions and put them where they belong. So we will copy them into Miro, which is our tool of choice for the presentation today. This is the first time I'm trying out Miro for presenting, and let's see how that works out for us. Should work quite nicely. We are recording this one. It's already kind of recording, so keep that in mind. And also after the webinar, we'll make a PDF. We'll export all of these, everything that you are seeing, we will export to a PDF and send it to you. And also a link to the recording.
Sounds good. I'm going to jump off right now. So you, Martin, get the stage for yourself, and I will be in the chat and then also monitoring your questions in the Q&A. So see you when the presentation is done for that part.
Cool, and thanks. So a couple of words about me. When I started out as an agile trainer, people told me, or a mentor told me that don't ever introduce yourself at the beginning of training, because if you do a good job, people will find out anyway who you are, and if you're not doing a good job, then you'd rather not. But I'm breaking that rule nowadays quite a bit. I'm an agile coach and trainer. I'm based in Helsinki, Finland. We're having a fantastic winter's day outside, -14, no wind to speak of, and a crystal blue sky. Really fantastic. And of course, I had to lower the shades because otherwise I wouldn't see a thing here. I would have the sun in my face. You can always see it here on my hands. So that's that about me and something about Helsinki also. And I hope that this is now settled. Good. Let's move on and into the actual content. So change. We are today going to talk about validating change, and we want to validate it in small increments, in small pieces, right? So it helps to understand what change is and how to think of it, right? And there's several different approaches to change, but generally how we approach change and how we think of it is we like to think of complexity, organizations as complex entities. What you have here in front of you is the Cynefin framework by Dave Snowden. He is he should be well known by now, and also the Cynefin framework should be well known. I'm not going to explain it any further, but I would like to say to basically set the stage and set the context here. Many people think that organizations are complicated, that you can sit down and you can design it. You can draw up an organizational diagram, or you can define a process, you can set up roles, and like the components of a machine, you then put in your human resources into this machine, and the human resources are able then to kind of, they are the components, but they follow rules, and they processes, and they have their own roles. And we think that this model is actually preventing change, because the only way you are if people are changing, if people are starting to do things differently, the machine is not working as efficiently as you thought. So there's a lot of compliance checking, assessments, process assessments. You will see carefully orchestrated change projects where people are, maybe you buy an assessment of the company, somebody, a big consulting company comes in, draws up a new approach for you, a new process, and then you deploy that. And the big problem is, how do you get people to actually change when they need to change, but not change otherwise? And we'd like to flip this on its head, and organizations are complex, right? So complex adaptive systems, they are defined by the connections, really. And the structures and the connections are related. So if you think about, organizational structures, you think about teams, departments, maybe communities of, let's say, practice similar roles coming together to work or to discuss something together. That creates connections between people, but it takes a while for those connections to grow and to start forming. And the people you work most with, the people on your team, that's where the connections are growing the fastest, and the connections are most stable. So that's how we like to think of organizations. And I personally, we have here rhetorical questions. How well do these things cope with complex systems? I mean, the traditional established tools, and they don't really cope well. So what other tools do we have? What could we do to change organizations if we believe that they are complex entities? All right. That's what we are going to explore today. So we'd like to flip this around a little bit, get away from the mechanical paradigm where you design an engine of sorts, or you design the organization like a mechanical thing, and look instead at an organic paradigm, or an organic metaphor, where the organization is more like a garden, or more like a tree. And the thing is that complex systems like these, they are not causal, meaning that there is, ahead of time, when you're looking into the future and you're planning changes, those changes may have unanticipated side effects. Because complex systems are not really causal, you cannot predict how they are going to react. Instead, they are dispositional. So they have a way of, kind of like a tree grows upwards, or it grows towards the light. And the roots go downwards, and they are trying to find water and nutrients. So in a similar way, organizations have certain dispositions, and you may be able to change those. You may be able to nudge them over time to create kind of a different disposition, where people are maybe more collaborative, or people are more self-organized, and so on. So that's your role then as an organizational developer, or as a manager or leader in this company, as a scrum master, as an agile coach, to nudge that system. But it's all about the connections. It's all about how you modulate those connections. Just as an example, bringing people into a specific meeting and facilitating an agenda. That's about creating certain connections, or using connections and then modulating those. And we like to nudge against or towards adjacent possibles. And in this case, an adjacent possible means a small change that is easily acceptable, that people understand, maybe have proposed themselves. Why don't we do it this way? It makes so much more sense, right? And so making use of that energy that exists in the company, the energy for change, and making small changes that are easily understandable, easily acceptable. If it goes wrong, if it turns out that change didn't work, then we can easily go back and so on. So that's the adjacent possible. Organic agility makes use of this by, first of all, we are setting a base of leadership, right? And that's because leaders are magnets for attraction. There's a saying, a quote from Atul Gawande, who is a doctor, pretty good at seeing systems at play, and he's written several books. By the way, I can recommend them to you. Leadership is the currency. Sorry, attention is the currency of leadership, meaning that leaders attract attention, and they are sometimes just by having a specific title or by being the kind of person that people listen to, they get a lot of attention. And they are able to fix that attention on certain things. And what they choose to kind of put people's attention on has a very strong impact on the culture, on what people think is important, on how people approach the work they do. Also, sometimes on the processes that people use, or generally the things that they do to get stuff done. And that's why the leadership is where it all starts. We have then 5 organic principles. I'll show you them in a moment. They are simultaneously acting as kind of a call to action, that these are the 5 things you need to focus on, but they also act as a kind of a scaffolding. And in this case, it means like something you can put in place while you are building your own, or you can adapt these principles to your own ways of working. And out of these come various practices. They are depicted here as a kind of a cloud because they are sometimes more or less temporary. They come and go. There's lots of different practices. Whatever works for you is what you should use, probably. And that might change. So if you think 10 years back or 10 years ahead, or even 5 years back and 5 years ahead, the practices that you are using might change, and sometimes quite radically and sometimes very slowly. But anyway, they are changing. And of course, for all of these, we need to have kind of theory-informed practice. So we have thinking models, we have practical, we call them tools, but you should maybe understand that more as kind of methods and workshop formats and various kinds of interventions, but also models for how to assess, for example, an organization, how to assess a team, how to understand, how to increase the self-organization level, and all of those. So they are kind of underpinning everything. To give you another example, it's maybe the way, let's say, Taiichi Ohno made Toyota into a lean company. So he was a man driven by a vision. We need to make the lead time as short as possible. And that was his tool. And that caused then over time, Toyota to evolve different thinking models and different, how to think about waste, how to think about overburden, all of those things. Another interesting example is Handelsbanken, which is it's a Swedish bank, but they're also active in, I believe, in Finland, obviously, but also in Germany and the UK and so on. So that they had another strong man who was the CEO starting from the 70s, and his overarching principle was decentralization. So that was his kind of model, his thinking model that informed his leadership. And over a decade or two, he started changing the bank into something more decentralized, meaning that the teams and at one point in time, over half of the employees had the right to give out loans, which is great. When you go into a bank and you want a loan, you can basically get a decision immediately just by talking to one person, instead of this decision having to trickle up through the organizational pyramid and then trickle down again a week later. So you can see how that's useful. So the principles that we are working on here is, first of all, we want to increase the cultural awareness and coherence. And the background there is that if people understand each other, if people are aware that, you know, the guys over in sales and the guys over in legal, they are a bit weird, yes, but they are people and they are our colleagues and so on. They do things a little bit differently. If people have that kind of an understanding, it's easier to actually introduce change and get that organization to move a little bit or to change. The second one is deciding based on context. So we are using the Cynefin framework that I mentioned previously. If you haven't made acquaintance with the Cynefin framework, please do. Go to YouTube after this webinar, not now, but go to YouTube and dig up some introductory videos by Dave Snowden. There's like 5-minute, 10-minute videos that are really great. He's an entertaining speaker. So the Cynefin framework, when we have a complicated situation, we need to take a certain approach. When we have a complex situation, we need to take a more probing, experimenting approach to things. And if the context is clear, it's simple or obvious, then we can, most of the time, we can actually automate things. So we don't need to use brain cells much at all. Third principle is about value creation. So basically 2 pieces here. What does value mean to our customers? And we need to go out there and talk to them about it. It's not like we can, you know, go into a meeting room, close the door, and then kind of make a wild guess, more or less educated guess at what they might find valuable. And that's actually, funnily enough, that's how most companies seem to do it, making assumptions. And the second part is we need to reorganize ourselves to basically how do we produce this as effectively as possible. And that comes down to how do we form teams, how are we looking at skills and combining skills into a team, how are we focusing on the work we are doing, portfolio, handling our portfolio of projects and opportunities and so on. Number 4, which is the topic of today, I'm still trying to set the stage a little bit here, is about validating change in small increments. And this is probing, sensing, responding. We want to be agile and we want to be a learning organization. Let's try different things. Let's see what works. Let's see what doesn't work. And then if it works, we do more of it. If it doesn't work, then we suppress it or we do less of it. So this is what we'll dig into today. And the final one is about optimizing the value flow. In this case, it means, well, you can think about, you know, lean principles. How do you minimize the lead time? How do you minimize the amount of distractions, the amount of how do you optimize or improve the collaboration? Synchronization points are not always bad, but they have a downside. For example, if everyone is piling up for a product increment, that product increment has, on one hand, kind of a focusing ability. It helps people focus on what needs to be done, but sometimes it turns into a commitment of a sort that perhaps shouldn't be there. I'm working with a company right now. They are running increment number 3, and they are already planning tasks and user stories for increment number 5, which might happen in September. So it's a bit tricky that way. How do you get rid of those synchronization points? Good. So that was the background. Now let's dig into principle number 4 and how to validate change in small increments. So I took a picture here. I brought in a picture of a forest, or actually it's the edge of a lawn with a small thinking bench where you can sit and think about things. And the thing is that landscapes and gardens, if you leave it, you will have wild forest basically. It has a disposition. It might be that you have pines and other conifers taking over, and it becomes a dark gray, a great place to pick mushrooms. Or it might be that it becomes a green, open forest like this one. That's random. But if you curate, if you tend your garden, so to speak, if you help trees find the right places, if you help them grow, oh, this is a great place for an oak. We could plant apple trees there. So let's see if we can get an early variety and a late variety. So we have apples in the late summer and early autumn too. All of these kind of things help create kind of a garden which is bearing fruit. And that's why I picked this picture, because it's on the border, right? Behind the bench there is an untended forest that could become something nice. But it happens one tree at a time, it happens one plant at a time. Sometimes you do bigger restructuring, sometimes you do smaller restructurings. But the first thing you would need to do is to figure out the lay of the land. So what could be done, right? And if we now jump back into the kind of the organizational, using the growth organic garden forest metaphor, but thinking in practice about organizations and how we can grow a learning organization. What we would like to start with is the lay of the land. So we need to assess the organization. And we would need to understand how the organization works. What are the specifics? What is the context right now? What is the situation? When we know that, we can start defining a goal. Most companies do have a sort of a strategy going. It may be good or it may be bad. Some companies write a strategy, then it's super secret, so they put it in a safe somewhere, and nobody is allowed to look at it. We think a strategic goal should be open, and it should be, at least for the employees and partners, so that people know what they are dealing with and have a kind of a goal to work towards. And then we need to figure out the strategy for getting there. And I have written here, adapt the strategy. That's what you do the second time around. The first time, if you don't have a strategy, then perhaps kind of creating one would be more appropriate. But generally, the assessing and defining a goal is maybe just like in Scrum, before you get into the first sprint, you need to have a bit of a backlog already to work on, right? And then you get into the first sprint and the second sprint and the third sprint, and that's when the cycle is starting to spin, and you have a backlog that you can work off, and you can refine, and you can groom, and you can work on for the upcoming sprints. So in a similar way, I think that assessing the organization, defining a goal is necessary work to do, but we really should get into this continuous cycle of learning. And this is an OODA cycle: observe, orient, decide, act, right? So what's happening is that we are assessing first, and then we are orienting ourselves by defining a goal and adapting the strategy. And then we decide to run experiments, and then we adapt either by, if that experiment is successful, let's say we learn something and we think it's good, what we see is kind of great outcomes. We have learned a new way of working. Then obviously we should inform everyone. We should say, hey, this great thing happening here on the other side of the corridor. Why don't you go and take a look? They are doing great things with something called Scrum, for example. So that's a key candidate then for rollout. But sometimes we try things that don't pan out as expected. We'll talk about how to define experiments later. But basically, we can also just terminate an experiment early. So we look at the things and we are deciding that this, the signals are not showing that this will succeed. So let's just kind of cut it short. And then we can go back to inspect the strategy, we can adapt it again, and we can start, continue the loop. And that's where we want to be. Inside this loop, constantly inspecting and adapting, creating transparency by experimenting and rolling out, and then again, inspecting and adapting. Transparency, inspect, adapt. Anyone heard about that before? It's, the thing is that here your target or your product is your organization and the people and the processes, and it's being worked on by the people who work in that organization. So then a couple of words about assessing an organization first. How do you do that? There's plenty of ways, and they all give a kind of an extra perspective. So what we specifically like is to look at the organizational culture. Some cultures are more extrovert, other companies might be turned more inwards towards kind of people and the processes. Then there are companies that are more kind of flexible, letting people have decision power, discretionary decision power. Think decentralization, for example. That's something I mentioned earlier, Handelsbanken and the decentralization approach. And other companies would like to have more of a kind of a consensus or maybe manager-led decision making, that we collect information centrally and then we make a decision, and that decision is then rolled out. So we like to look at that, the competing values framework. We like to do discovery workshops. We like to do interviews. We do agile assessments. You can use lean analysis methods, although those are fairly often they exist in the kind of the complicated domain of Cynefin, and we would like to work in the complex domain, or have tools that work better in the complex domain. If you can afford it, you can hire ethnographers to come in and observe people. And it's a bit funny, actually. You have researchers standing around with pen and paper and observing who is talking to whom and what are they talking about, and so on, being a fly on the wall in board meetings or in leadership meetings and so on. And then just to bring it up, so collecting micro narratives using something like SenseMaker or OrgScan is a great way. You get a very wide selection of things that are going on that you can capture, and the people who are tagging and adding metadata are the ones who actually know about that event or that decision or this what they are kind of submitting to the system. So the quality of data is fantastic. Getting enough data is tricky, but there are strategies for that. So when you have an assessment, when you have understood what the organization is like, it's time to start defining a strategy. And we like to do that using a tool called an Agile Strategy Map. Now, there are more tools for this, but we really like this one, find it super useful. The first thing you would like to do is to come up with a strategic goal, obviously. A time frame usually of, let's say, 12 months, 24 months, sometimes up to 3 years, I think is going to be good. A couple of years is useful. Some key achievements, maybe secondary achievements. And what this goal is depends on your company, depends on who you are, depends on your market. It depends on whether your products are kind of early stage or late stage. Who you are selling to. Are you selling to a couple of big customers or a large number of small customers? And it can be related to, it can be external factors like having happier customers, responding faster to customer requests, grabbing a larger market share, or it could be internal also. So having shorter cycle times, saving costs, although that's seldom a good one if you want to change, then saving money is not going to give you any good opportunities, I suppose. The big problem there is that it cuts down on the options that you have. People look at the options and they're like, oh, no, too expensive, ain't gonna do that. We need to save costs and so on. So that doesn't really work out fine. But things like adding or increasing the flexibility, self-organization, increasing the quality of your products, all of that is could be a strategic goal. We like to have a strategic goal that is relative. We like to have one that is under your control. So in a way, increasing the quality might be more achievable because it's under your control compared to, for example, grabbing or achieving 37% market share, which is also depending on how easily your competitors are going to give you those extra points of market share. Around this, we have a bunch of success factors. They come in two kinds. The confirmed success factor is something that we know works. And we know it because we have seen it work. It's a fact. It's a well-known fact, or it's something we have tried and found useful. We also have potential success factors, and those are the interesting ones. That's what we could do, right? If your company is a bit risk averse, if they are a bit kind of slow on the risk taking side, applying confirmed success factors and then doing maybe the occasional potential success factor is going to bring you forward. Yes, that's true. However, it's not going to give you any radical agility. Agile means or brings the connotation of actually creating change. I compare this to the word flexible, or adaptive, which means that you are kind of following along. If somebody else is doing the changes, then you are kind of following along. So by the more comfortable you are doing or having the potential success factors and experimenting, the more you can create change. And that's a kind of a business advantage, an unfair business advantage in its own. So it's really worth experimenting with, right? So, and you can see the difference here in wording. So we have the confirmed success factor saying by doing something we have learned, and this is which has helped create some results or give us some value. And the potential success factor is by doing something we expect to get some results. And of course, it needs to be kind of motivated and well kind of built up. There needs to be a case for this, why it's worth doing. You can do wild stuff, wild things if you want to. Somebody said that why don't you, if you have problems with bugs, defects in your software, in the software you are producing, why don't you hire a hex doctor to come and exorcise all the bad spirits from your source control server? And that's actually a valid experiment. It's indirect because it doesn't attack the root cause, which is how do those bugs come into your software in the first place. It attacks the symptom, which is that the bugs are there. And it's also, we call it an oblique, an indirect experiment, because it would go, it's basically you're just outsourcing the problem. You're throwing money at a consultant, in this case, a hex doctor, to take care of it. So you don't have to think about it. So it's a kind of a naive and oblique experiment. Naive comes from throwing money, and oblique comes because it goes to attacks the symptoms and not the underlying root cause. Anyway, so this kind of stuff, by doing that particular experiment, you might have interesting conversations in the company, which might lead to people sharpening up and saying, we are not going to waste money on that kind of stuff again. So let's get this done. And you might, because companies are complex, organizations are complex, remember, and there might be unintended side effects. So one such side effect might be that people actually, turn up the sleeves and then get to work themselves. And then we have necessary conditions. We have obviously the experiments I mentioned, and we'll look into an experiment template later, also by Dave Snowden and from Cognitive Edge. But the necessary conditions are basically found by sitting down and thinking that, let's say we want to train our people. So what do we need? Yeah, we need, nothing's going to happen unless we have a good trainer. Nothing's going to happen unless we have trainings in the agenda so people can actually sign up. Nothing good will come out of it unless we track who's been taking what training and so on. So we need to basically see and so on. And there might be more necessary conditions. I just listed a few here. Cool. So this is a strategy map. I tried to make at the same time it's a kind of an example, but also it is a kind of a template that you can start using. And that's how we define and also how we adapt the strategy. Now the question is, if you remember, let's zoom back to here. We have looked at various ways of assessing. We have looked now at the strategy map, which is a way of defining the goal, and we can adapt this. What happens next? Experiments, yeah. Rolling out, yeah. Inspecting the strategy, yes, yes, yes. And who is going to do all of that? It turns out that people are super happy to participate in assessments. People are queuing up to be defining the strategy map. And then the big question is who is going to do the dirty work, which is actually changing the company. And for doing that, we have a couple of different roles. These may be called differently in your company or in other places, but we need somebody who's sitting on the money pouches, so the sponsor, so to speak. In addition to the sponsor, we need to have, and typically the sponsor is in charge of the whole strategic goal and the strategy map and so on, and telling people that yes, you not only are you allowed to work on this, but you are expected to work on this. And I want to see in our timekeeping system, time reporting system, that everyone is spending 20% of their time on something like this. For example, that's a way a sponsor can actually kind of give money, assuming that you have a time reporting system, assuming and so on. But there's a way of making that transparent. We would have a champion typically for each success factor. And now a success factor is something that it might kind of live for, let's say, 3-4 months. It might live for 2 years, 3 years. And the expectation is that the champion, maybe the success factor is falling into the area of responsibility for that person. But sometimes we see kind of champions come and go in such a way that when a success factor becomes, it's not so relevant anymore. There are more urgent success factors we should work on, that maybe somebody else is stepping up, or the same champion is moving on to do something else, and then later maybe moving back to this success factor. So it's a way of focusing by having one person being responsible that work is happening on this. And the champion can be a manager, a scrum master, an agile coach, or basically anyone who has a strong interest in seeing things happen on this, let's say on HR side, or R&D processes, or product quality, or anything. We then have an improvement squad working tightly with the champion. So those are the people who are brainstorming the necessary conditions and also brainstorming experiments, talking to the experiment teams to come up with new experiments and so on. This is not like people are working in a vacuum. Everyone is kind of pulling together here. The improvement squad is also in a way tied to the success factor. They are formed for a specific success factor. They might move on to different success factors. They might stay on doing different experiments until they are satisfied, and so on. But the experiment teams are more like, it might be a development team that is being pulled in for something. It might be a group of people who are sitting down to write a guide or a manual, or to produce something for a little while. But these are the guys who are actually doing the work, and they are all volunteers. I want to make this very clear. The champion is volunteering, the sponsor is volunteering to let's make this happen. The champions are volunteering to make a certain success factor happen, and then asking for volunteers to form the improvement squad. The improvement squad is fishing around for teams that would be willing to experiment, and so on. So this means that there is already a bit of a buy-in, and because the improvement squad and the experiment teams are operative personnel, they are always kind of they know what they are talking about. They know what they are experimenting with. Good. A couple of words about, I think I did a bit of an explanation on safe to fail experiments. There's 3 points here. One is that this is super specific. You do this, these people have promised to do that. We need to provide these things, and so on. Another thing is that the people involved are the people who are going to do the work. So we get the buy-in already from the start. We have failure conditions, meaning if this is going to fail, how do we know? What are we looking for? Okay, so it might be signals that people are not joining meetings. It might be a measurement, a metric that we are following. It might be anything basically. But this helps by allowing us to terminate the experiment early. So it is no use if we have scheduled this for, let's say, 3 sprints or 4 sprints to run for 2 months if we already see after 1 week or 2 weeks that this is not going anywhere. So then we can just pull the big handbrake and say, sorry guys, let's terminate this. We have learned something valuable, and let's free up the resources to work on something else or experiment with something else. We also want to have dampening actions, so a rollback plan, basically a controlled set. How do we, as cheaply as possible, undo the change? How do we kind of, go back to square A and see where we basically just leave out the change and reset the situation in such a way that we can move forward with something else. And these 2 failure conditions and dampening actions, they also help quite a bit with kind of lowering the resistance to change and lowering people's resistance to experimenting. Not all organizations can take experimentation. They might feel that, yes, it's all right to experiment, but then, oh no, you're not allowed to fail. Why did you run this experiment if you're going to fail? The thing is with experiments, if you know you're going to fail, you don't need to run them. So every time you set out with an experiment, you basically don't. You are doing an experiment because you don't know that you're going to fail. Anyway. And that's it. This is called a safe to fail experiment. It's also by Dave Snowden from Cognitive Edge, tightly tied to the Cynefin framework. And this is a slightly simplified template for that. Dave Snowden has one which I think is fairly similar, but it's got a couple of more, it's naive or oblique experiments, and maybe the learning objectives and the context and background are slightly different. Let's sum up. We have less than 15 minutes left, and I just wanted to spend a minute on this before we jump on into the questions, and I can already see that there's a handful of questions coming up. So primarily, organizations are complex. Our old management methods are no longer sufficient. We need to use complex management methods to get things done, to change the organization. And we would like to have a more of a gardening metaphor, an organic metaphor. How do we use the disposition in the company to grow so that the leaves are turning towards the light and the roots are going to nutrition and water? In order to make this happen, we need to work in small segments, small pieces of work in progress. We want to review, we want to actually try things out, not just draw PowerPoints until the cows come home, but we want to try things out and see whether it is a good idea, whether it works for us or doesn't. That's called empirical process control. And generally, being a learning organization, doing continuous improvement, having a very small number of work in progress. Sometimes if we have a large company and a lot of resources to experiment with, we can run multiple experiments. If we are a smaller company, we might want to limit the number of experiments or the number of success factors that we are working on. Good. I think I managed to capture everything in 41.5 minutes. Not going to drag it out to 42 minutes. Instead, let's see what questions we have.
Thank you, Martin. I have listed some of the questions now that have been coming in the Q&A and in the chat. So they are all on your Q&A board right now if you want to take it from there.
Yes. Now, the first one, my boss says we are allowed to experiment. It's a decoy. I wrote it because, because I thought that unless there are questions coming in, then at least we have one that we can kind of pretend to discuss. But I'll move it out of the way. It's not really relevant for us today. Why is it not enough that the company defines the goal, and why is it necessary to assess the organization first? Well, there's an old proverb, Chinese proverb, saying it's wisdom. The beginning of wisdom is to talk about things with their right names. So yes, we can make assumptions and we can set out on a strategic conquest towards a goal. However, if we first check the context, if we first check the landscape, if we first check the company, what we are looking like, and there are situations where the top management have absolutely no clue, and we go in and we run, let's say we ask the managers to guess the results of a survey, and the managers make the most positive evaluation ever, and then we are saying, okay, actually here's the results, and management is like, no, that can't be true, and we're like, yes, it can be true. So assessing the organization gives you a lot of valuable information, and with that information at your fingertips, it's easier to make good decisions. Let's put it that way. And that's why it is necessary to assess the organization first. Now, mind you, I've seen companies where Scrum Masters start writing safety fail experiments in order to try out a little bit more, being a bit more kind of ambitious about the things that they can do. But they usually also have in their own context of a team or maybe a handful of teams, they have something they want to achieve, and then they are taking in constructing an experiment to figure out where what is possible and what is not possible. I hope we got an answer to that one. Could you please make it a little clear in your organic model, what is what in organization, like branches, roots, fruits, and leaves, etc.? Eats, shoots, and leaves. Was it so? The old joke. Anyway, I want to make clear this is a metaphor or a paradigm, right? So it's not possible to say this is the root, this is the leaf. It's more like the general concept of having a, look, I'm trying to grow chilies over here. Just put them down here. It's not going very well, but this is each of these contains a chili plant, or should. It doesn't look very promising at the moment. But to me, I need to nurture the whole plant. I need to water it. I need to replant it. I need to figure out what's going wrong. In this case, I have a second similar things where the plants are growing like there's no tomorrow. And I'm already wondering if I'm away for next week, who is going to take care of those, because I wasn't expecting them to do this. But there's no analogy. I mean, it's a plant consisting of, yeah, well, it has leaves and it has roots and it has, but it's also living in a piece of soil. It has some earth, it has nutrients, it has possibly too much water in this case. But you see where I'm heading. This is a way of thinking. And your HR team might be the berry bushes over there, and your corporate security might be the stone wall over there, but it's a, I don't know, it's just a way of thinking, maybe a metaphor more than an analogy more than anything else. Wardley maps. Happy you asked, because we are applying Wardley, Simon Wardley's thinking, and that's where the basically we have modified the original strategy map, which was mostly like a mind map. So now we have modified it a little bit to take into take the concept of a map that it should be descriptive of an area. So we are changing the strategy map a little bit. That's kind of strategy map 102, so it's something that I was about to skip, but we are changing it a little bit. And Wardley maps, I would like to think that the Agile Strategy Map incorporates a great many things from Simon Wardley's thinking, because we have found it profoundly useful. And the dynamic element comes from the fact that the success factors come and go. It's a bit like the theory of constraints, where we have there's always something that is kind of holding the company back or the system back, the biggest bottleneck, so to speak. And when we, or the worst bottleneck, not the bigger, the narrowest bottleneck, however you make it. And so we would like to get rid of that one first, but it may be that we just need to do a little work, and then it kind of becomes not such a bad bottleneck anymore, and then something else is now a big bottleneck. So over time, this is a living document. We take the necessary conditions, the success factors, and experiments become quite natural kind of parts on a Kanban board. So we have a champion, we have a Kanban board, we have one vision, one goal, which is the success factor. Then we can have a bunch of experiments, necessary conditions for those, confirmed success factors, and so on. And they make up quite a nice board, Kanban board, and then we can bring this back every now and then, occasionally updating the Wardley map, maybe on a monthly basis. It doesn't make sense to visit it more than, let's say, twice a month, maybe on a monthly basis. So yes, Wardley maps, thumbs up, and yes, we gave it thumbs up already 2-3 years ago, I think. So it's already in there a bit. And then we have the learning curve being in the production team and outside the production team with using these strategy maps. Not entirely sure that I understand the question. If it's okay, the person, whoever you are who wrote this question, could you write, I mean, could you help us understand it a little bit while I jump onto the red team thinking frame with improvement and experiments? So I'll take this one first, and then we can return to the learning curve. So personal total sprint effort can be assigned to these squads. Yes. So it depends, which is our standard answer to almost everything. It depends. So the thing is that we want volunteers. We want people who are interested in solving a problem or interested in bringing their own expertise. Sometimes they have expertise, sometimes they have energy. The sponsor needs to say how much percentage of the total sprint effort. Let's say if the sponsor says that yes, you can use 20%, for example, that means that after the sprint you should be able to see, 20% of the tasks should be bright red or whatever color you have. So you should be able to afterwards, to ahead of time, to say yes, this sounds reasonable. And afterwards, you should be able to also kind of see that are we spending 10% or 30%? And maybe that's not a big problem. Average 20%, whatever, you can adjust as you go. But it's something that should be allowed. Some things allowed and also kind of requested. Some things take more time. It might be kind of building something. You want to have a website, internal website on the internet, telling people, informing them about some stuff. There might be some writing and coding involved, for example, and that takes time away from your operative work. Other times, it's a change in behavior. What if we do these things in this way rather than that way? What if we bring in 3 different questions to the daily stand-up? Instead of asking what you do you have any impediments? What are you planning to do tomorrow? What if we just look at the board and ask questions like which story or which task could we bring to completion? First of all, is the board up to date? What are the changes that have happened since yesterday? What story, what task could we bring to completion next? And then what story is blocked, or is there a task that is blocked? So we change the questions. How much effort does that take? 0.5%, 0%, 1%, I don't know. So you can also think of it that way, that some things might actually require days and days of active typing, writing, coding, whatever, discussing, negotiating with people. And other things might be just, let's ask a different question instead of what we have asked previously. Okay, I'm sorry, this turns out to be a kind of a non-answer. It's not as specific as you wanted to, but still something, I hope.
I added, Martin, some comments below the last question with some bullet points that the participant wrote, and then the question was rephrased again on the right. And then I added one more question, but I think we are running out of time. So maybe you can take these 2 questions still, and then we need to, unfortunately, move on and cut the webinar in a while. Okay, but I'll take that question first, right? So rephrasing question, what are the learning curves for people both inside and outside the product team? Okay, super interesting question. That's an so obvious question. I should have thought about it myself and already kind of answered it in the lecture part. Thanks for asking. First of all, I think leaders need to understand that continuous improvement is something that happens all the time, and it needs to come from the people on the factory floor, so to speak, and it needs to have a percentage attached. You need to spend 17.5% on average on, or whatever it happens to be, 2.5, 7.7, I don't know, on continuous improvement. Otherwise, you are lagging behind. All your competitors are already spending 5% on average. Are you willing to match that, or are you willing to throw in 7%? Did I hear 8, 9%, 10% for the man over in the corner? Anyway, so that's one thing that leaders need to learn. They also need to learn that people, or to allow people to make changes that sometimes feel stupid, but are, I mean, when you look at it and you're like, how is that supposed to save your time? You're asking 3 different questions in a daily stand-up. What's up with that? How's this ever going to make a difference? But you have to just kind of give the team the opportunity sometimes to hit the wall and bounce back, and then think of, why did we hit the wall? Why doesn't this work? And then come back with a new approach. It's about kind of not only allowing change, but also kind of guiding it, nudging it a little bit, telling people in which direction they can go, and then watching as they fall around and walk into the walls, but generally move in the right direction, I would say.
There's also a corresponding learning curve in the team, in that they need to start feeling comfortable with the adjacent possible. And that's going to be, if you look at a traditional kind of manufacturing company or a bank, very classical traditional company, for example, the adjacent possible is going to be very, very slim, because the processes are well defined and this is how we've always done it and so on. And also going in to change something, that's a huge risk. Why if it doesn't work? And then it's all your fault because you went and proposed this change. So widening this a little bit and opening up for change, giving them the tools, and also having the boss saying, great work, guys, we have learned something new. The experiment failed, great, because we have learned quite a lot of stuff now. Rather than a boss saying, you know, what, the experiment failed, am I paying you to fail here, right? Sharpen up, guys. So that's also kind of a learning curve, and also keeping your eyes and ears open. I mentioned that companies are all about connections, and sometimes even in a traditional bank or manufacturing company, the most valuable team member is the one who has, connections everywhere. The guy who's been like 57 years with the company and knows everyone, and is able to, you have a problem and this guy is like, oh, let me talk to Mr. A and Mrs. B, and then we'll see what happens. And then 3 days later they've had their coffee and they have actually agreed to get stuff done or whatever. And that can be super useful. But in general, kind of opening up and letting people understand that, yeah, well, these guys in the legal department, they are not only stopping us from getting stuff done, but what if we talk to them, sit down over a coffee, think about what we want to achieve and the constraints that are there. It's not the legal guys who are stopping us, it's the laws and the regulations. And sometimes the legal people are doing it super safe and kind of adding extra things, but maybe we can kind of negotiate about that. And basically, so that's another learning curve, that we don't want silos, and insofar as we have them, we should step out of those silos and try to become more like one big company rather than a bunch of small factions sitting in our bunkers and lobbing bombs at each other. Good. Are we?
Thank you, Martin, for all the answers to the questions and for your presentation also today. There's been a lot of questions going on.
There's one not answered, but I think I'll have to leave it now.
Yeah, I also put in the chat already, if you want to reach out to us, you can do that to our office, and we are happy to schedule calls or whatsoever with you to answer more of the questions that might come up from this webinar. So feel free to do that. We are happy to book a call. We can also pull in Martin if you want him to come and answer stuff for you. So that's good.
I'll be happy to. I'll be happy to, although 90% of the answers are going to be, it depends. But then I can help you figure out the answers actually. And in case you want to know more, we have a couple of references, and that's the book, the Organic Agility Handbook. We have the strategy mapping tool. Obviously, you can do it with paper and pen on a wall, post-its on a wall, or you can do it in any kind of Miro like this one. We have run workshops on that one. Or you can use a tool that we have there. And then obviously the Organic Agility website, I think.
Yeah, the links were also shared during the webinar in the chat with you guys, but we will also put it in an email, so you don't need to take everything down right now. You're going to have an email with the links, so don't worry about that. I see that somebody is asking also now in the chat, but we will send it to you after the webinar, so no worries.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. It was really nice to have you all here again. Stay tuned for the principle number 5 coming up still in spring. And if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out to us. You will have our emails in the email, so we are happy to answer any questions. Stay safe. Have a nice end of the week, and thank you, Martin, again.
Thanks, Sophia. And bye-bye, everyone. See you around.